Hey everyone, welcome to the 375th episode of Just Shoot It, a podcast about filmmaking, screenwriting, and directing. This episode is brought to you by patrons Alex Reeves and Jake Hamby. I'm Oren Kaplan.
And I'm Yedlin. Today we've got Bobby Lam on the show to talk to us about aspect ratios. We are going deep on all of the common and popular aspect ratios that you would ever hope to shoot in your career. Who knows? Maybe somebody will invent a new one, but like all of the usual suspects are outlined here.
Yeah, some of the greatest hits: 2:4, 1:8:5, 1:1, 9:16.
We've got some hot takes. His new favorite aspect ratio. We're going to talk about it.
Don't spoil that.
I won't. People are dying to know.
I mean, we are, obviously we're being a little facetious here, but I do think that for me personally, and the aspect ratio has become a more important choice and more something I find that I need to fight for a lot more over the last few years. But also that it can be a really creative decision, which I know everyone knows this, but I don't know. I'm just kind of trying to, now that we've gone from the super wide to super tall aspect ratios, I just think I've been thinking a lot more about what's right for what, and why can't I make a good TikTok video? And is it because I'm thinking of how to cram a 16:9 frame into a 9:16 frame? And we talk a lot about that and kind of different strategies and our opinions on things. And I think we dive into kind of some good examples of how you would use all the different ones. So I think whether you are very technical or not, even if you're like an actor or someone that has to exist within these aspect ratios, definitely if you're a cinematographer, I think this is an interesting conversation. And as directors, it's something that you would think is up to us, but oftentimes is not. But the more powerful we get as directors, the more say we have. And we've seen a lot of kind of some of the more successful and famous filmmakers, being able to choose their own aspect ratios. And I'm surprised we never talked about Grand Budapest Hotel, which, pops around different aspect ratios.
Sure. Yeah.
It's one of the classics.
I think there's plenty of films that will kind of try and tell you something. Everything Everywhere All at Once jumps through multiple aspect ratios to tell you in what universe you're in. Like the past is all 4:3. I think like when they're in the movie star, like Wong Kar-wai universe, I think that's 2:3:5. They jump around for sure. Even maybe change mid scenes sometimes as well. Anyway, on a face value, I think a conversation about aspect ratio is purely craft, but I think inevitably you end up talking a little bit about business, power structures, as you were hinting at before, and also the tonal philosophies that you're trying to impart on people. So I think it's a really great mixture of technical and craft and art all at once. So it was a good one.
Yeah, I'm looking at the tech specs for Everything Everywhere All at Once, and they did shoot 1:3:3, which is 4:3, 1:8:5, 2:3:9, and my new favorite aspect ratio, which you'll find out if you listen to the episode,
or if you saw the movie already and paid attention to.
No one would know from that. But before we talk to Bobby Lam, who also, I feel like we could have a whole episode just talking about you and Bobby, because you
sure. Half my stuff, Bobby shot.
Half your stuff, kind of like me. I kind of had similar relationships with two different DPs. Recently, I've just kind of been DP hopping, DP, not shopping, but just kind of like creating an arsenal. Anyhow, so Bobby's on. Yeah. He's great. We talk about aspect ratios. We've both known him for a really long time. It was cool to chat with him. Before we talk to him, though, people, we do have a Patreon. Patreon.com/JustShootItPod. Our good buddy, Sambo Steve, stuntman extraordinaire, martial artist and previous guest, and also someone that has been helpful when I need information on how to achieve certain stunts. He emailed us and he said that we should be more interactive with our Patreon patrons.
Yeah, he's right.
So come to patreon.com/JustShootItPod. Give us $1, $2, $20, $100, $10 million. That's only happened twice before. Just something that helps us keep the podcast alive. We're on episode 375. Been doing this for a while. And so it's helpful when people join the Patreon. We get to pay our editor. Really, if you just feel like you're getting anything out of this podcast. One last thing. I want to tell a quick story. I was on set in Miami a couple days ago. There was an actor there that I had actually fought pretty hard to get because I thought he was head and shoulders above all the other actors that were reading for this role. It's a guy that has to decide between a hot dog and a hamburger, as if it's like the biggest decision of his life. Like, is he going to cut the red wire or the blue wire? He chooses the wrong place, everyone dies. So this guy comes on set, he's this like the third day we cast him, we call him back, the whole thing. I fight for him. He's finally on set, part of a giant cast. And one of our last shots, I go, "Hey, how's it going, Derek? I loved your audition. Thanks for coming to set. This is what we're doing." He's like, "Oh, by the way, while I was setting up for the callback, I was pulling down my backdrop, getting my camera, getting my lights on. I was listening to the Just Shoot It podcast. And then I logged on and I was like, what? Oren Kaplan is auditioning me. How crazy."
And he did
not say anything. Just crazy, because he would have gotten the job on the spot. If I ever audition you, then let me know. I'll just book you right away.
It would work on us, though. I wonder how everyone else in the room would feel about it. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you were like, "Oh, I want to cast this person," would they, in the back of their mind, or maybe even to your face, be like, "You just want to cast them because they like your podcast"?
No, I think it actually would have the exact opposite effect. And so I make fun of you all the time, because I'm constantly meeting people that listen to the podcast, and you don't even know if this podcast is out in the world or if it's just all on a hard drive, because you've never met anyone that's heard of the podcast. Slight
all
exaggeration.
of our numbers are fake. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a Truman Show style in your world. Your attitude right now is that if somebody told us that they were on the podcast, that would make us look bad, like if we wanted to cast them. My attitude is, if I'm in a casting session, I have agency people, producers, everyone, and an actor comes on and says, "Oh, you're Oren Kaplan. I listen to your podcast. I'm a huge fan. Like, I just was listening to this episode about this."
It does make you look cooler if
it
you
makes
own
you
it.
look super. You don't need to do anything. You just say thanks.
Well, but
everyone else in the room is like, "Whoa, Oren is kind of. I'm glad we chose this well-known director that people are talking about and excited to meet."
No, that's a good point. Whereas I think I would be demure about it or something. I don't know. Like my
podcast sucks.
I've been on this job for the last 2 months running a room.
You haven't mentioned the podcast once.
Not one time.
Not
one time. Yeah.
What is wrong with you? There's this last thing. We got to get to the episode. It's already way too long as it is. But I read this book about luck. It's called The Science of Luck. And it's about this guy was like, why do some people win the lottery like 5 times, and other people are just like dying at young ages and things. And his conclusion was that lucky people, he did this really amazing experiment. He said, "Hey, meet me at like La Cienega and Sunset Boulevard. I want to do this study about luck." And he asked people before this if they consider themselves lucky or unlucky, and he basically brought 100 people that consider themselves lucky, 100 people that consider themselves unlucky. And he was like, "Meet me at La Cienega and Sunset." And then as soon as they got there, he'd be like, "Oh, sorry, I told you the wrong street. It's Fairfax and Sunset. Just like a couple blocks. Can you just walk over here?" And he planted a $20 bill on the sidewalk, loose $20 bill. And he said, by a statistically significant margin, the lucky people found it and the unlucky people didn't find it. And he said that one of the lucky people had to reschedule with him once. He said, "Oh, why'd you have to reschedule?" And the guy's like, "On my way to this interview, I fell down a flight of stairs, broke my leg, and had to be taken in an ambulance to the hospital. So I'm real sorry about that." And he's like, "Wow, so do you still consider yourself lucky?" And he goes, "Yeah, I could have broken my head. Like, I'm fine." And so that book has really convinced me that it's 100% about attitude. The lucky people are open to seeing the $20 bill. And the unlucky people,
because I feel like for the most part, I think you have to have that attitude to be a successful director, right? Like, there is that mentality of like, "Oh, I am going to book work. I am going to survive." All of those element of risk, where if you didn't believe that you were going to be able to pull it off, you just wouldn't do it in the first place,
Yeah, but there's the tortured artist narrative that also...
I don't know. I don't know many tortured artists that are making a living.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not saying that you're like that you're a unlucky person. I'm saying that when it comes to the podcast,
I am weird about the podcast.
You're closed to the world.
I think it's because, honestly, this is the truth, and then we'll move on. We talk about a lot of personal stuff, and I talk about people, and I always am cloaking their identity into the point where, like, you always razz me about, like, there's no way any person...
If they listen to it, it would mean that we've made it in a certain way. And This is a perfect example. One of the producers on this last job I had was like, oh, you have a podcast? And I was like, yeah, please don't listen to it because all I do is complain about my current job. So if you can wait at least a month before you listen to it. Guess what he did that next minute? He downloaded our last episode. It's called promotion. It's called marketing, Matt.
I know. I got to get on it. All right.
Okay.
375 episodes in. Maybe I'll figure it out. Anyway, let's talk to our old pal, Bobby Lam.
Hey, we're here with Bobby Lam, commonly known as Blam.
Or Bobby DP.
Bobby DP, is that your website?
Bobby Lam is my website, bobbylam.com. Yeah. You can go to bobbydp.com. It will just go there, though.
Yeah, it's an outdated reference, I suppose.
Bobby's shot many, many things, including one of my daughter's favorite movies. We can't talk about it because it's under wraps. It's just kidding. It's called Under Wraps. It's about a mummy. But also, if you add the amount of time Matt's known you and the amount of time I've known you together, it's probably like 40 years or something.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just shy, but about that.
Because you guys met freshman year in college?
Bobby was the first person I met in college, period.
You shot something for me, right? Did you shoot Sourced Out?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
That's right.
But Bobby and I worked together even before that. I think you were a gaffer on something and I covered for you, and I was a dolly grip. And you were
back in the crew days.
Yeah. Worked on some USC thesis films. This was my whole, like when people, and I don't know if it works this way at all nowadays, but in 2005, when I moved to LA, you basically just went on Craigslist. You found a job to work for free. I mean, you guys went to film school, so you're already plugged in, but for someone that wasn't like plugged in,
you don't know who's looking for work. Like no one's like stands up in the middle of class and says, "Hey, everyone, I'm shooting a short this weekend and I need gaffers."
Oh, yeah. What you just described is pretty close to what I remember, especially just graduating. I mean, some of the jobs that I was getting, just like the total bottom barrel. I think like the first electric job that I did was like $50 a day. You know, yeah.
Which that's like $150 now.
Yeah. I guess with inflation.
I guess that's really
but
true.
I didn't know anyone, you know, so I literally just moved to LA and I was like, I worked for free on like 10, 20, I don't know, as whatever. And I learned those crew positions. The first time I was ever the dolly grip was on a guy, Seth Dalton's thesis film. He went to USC. Familiar. He was a grad student at SC. And I think I met like Lawson or one of you guys.
I think I met you on there too. Yeah. That sounds really familiar. Yeah.
And literally they're like, we don't have a dolly grip. Do you want to do it? I'm like, yes, I will happily do it. What is dolly grip? And then, I fell in love with it and and I met, you know, we worked on that Nelson Craig's thesis. Right. Yeah. This like big sci-fi thing. So it was crazy how fast you working from free to getting paid like $50 a day to making enough money to kind of split rent with like 10 roommates or however many you have to live with. You can go, which is much easier when you're like 20 than when you're 40.
When you're like, hey, can I take this Ziploc bag full of craft services home? That's perfect.
But that was my way in through you guys. You're like my USC connections. And then my friend went to AFI, you know, Jen Glynn, she was a producer there. And I worked on all her thesis films, you know, obviously for free. Those are like my two film communities, like the USC, mostly undergrads like you and Vinny and Lawson and whoever, Jesse Feldman and stuff, and AFI students. And so, I mean, I know a lot of times on the podcast, we tell people they should like take classes at UCB to kind of get into this world. But like, to me, that was my way in from like 0 to 100, knowing absolutely nobody and not even knowing how to make films.
Yeah, sure. You just are like, I'm around. I think that works for, and I swear we'll get to the real topic soon, but I think that works for a certain personality type that's like a quick study and like observant and a good attitude. I feel like I did that a little bit as well and knew people and just wasn't quick on the draw, like didn't get what anybody needed from me. I guess maybe there's a gift in being a dolly grip because you know what your department is. Do you know what I mean? You're like, I work on the dolly. They tell me where the dolly goes. Whereas like if I remember being a PA and really wanting to do a good job and just just flopping, just chunking. Because you need more awareness of just like what a set is in order to anticipate.
PA is a much harder job, I think, to learn. As odd as it sounds, to become a good PA, you need to be yelled at a lot, I think. And I don't mean like in a mean way, but you need to be told you not to stand around and to go do things. And dolly grip. I don't know. I've said this a million times on podcasts, but to me, my two favorite positions, if you have to choose a random crew position to like learn about filmmaking, are dolly grip and boom up. Boom up is like the best because you literally can learn it in like 2 hours.
It is physical in a way that a dolly grip is.
Yeah, man, a dolly grip, you got to freaking lift up.
Dolly grips aren't
500-pound dolly.
Yeah, dolly grips. Look, no disrespect, but like I would rather be a dolly grip than a boom operator for sure.
Oh, it's more fun, but a boom. If you have a closed set with 3 people, like you have a camera operator. If you have two people, camera operator nowadays, the AC is like doesn't even need to be remotely close to the camera. And you have the boom up. Like those are the only 2 people that have to be in there with the actors, and you hear the directors and you hear the actors, and you're so in the action. And it's a PA. There's a chance you're like off at like Vaughn's trying to find ginseng for Jamiroquai.
Yeah, exactly.
But a dolly grip is like the next position, right? Because your job is you are in charge of the dolly, but if there is no dolly, you're in charge of camera support, right? So you're helping with the sticks, right? You're carrying the tripod around, you're balancing the head, you're doing whatever. You're kind of halfway in the camera department. So you get to also, again, if we're down to 5 or 6 people, you're like one of the more important people to keep close to the actors and the directors. So anyhow, thanks for coming on the podcast, Bobby.
Oh, yeah. Glad to be here.
We hope we hope you enjoyed it.
Oren, you called me today and you were like, hey, I've got an idea for an episode.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be bored by it.
Yeah, I have a topic.
Aspect ratios. And I said, okay, let's do it. We haven't done a craft episode in kind of a while.
Yeah. Well, so I've been thinking a lot about aspect ratios, and I wanted to have a DP on to talk about it, and some, a DP that we both know would be helpful, just because I felt like, if it's someone we don't know, we kind of have to go into backstories and like figure out who they are. But since we both know Bobby, like we said, a combined 40 years, we thought we could just kind of jump right into it. I'm sure, Bobby, you have a lot of opinions, as many DPs do on aspect
It's
ratios.
very much in the zeitgeist. It's funny. I actually before you asked me to come on, there's like this tweet that gets passed around about Seinfeld, like how it's being aired right now on Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
There's an episode, I guess it's called The Pothole, and there's a whole thing about how they basically reformatted the original 4:3 aspect ratio to fit into a rectangular box, and they just cut out like all this information.
All the potholes.
So they're complaining about something down at the bottom of the screen, but you can't see it. And it's a pothole.
Yeah. So
it's worth it also to mention, Bobby, you do a lot of posts. You do a lot of.
I do.
You're a colorist as well. So besides all of the shooting that you do, you also see other people's aspect ratios and have to live with the ramifications of that visually. A lot of bullshit under your belt, I guess, is what we're saying.
Yeah. And even though you're a cinematographer, and obviously, I feel like cinematographers tend to approach filmmaking from a technical side. Like I really wanted to keep this conversation to a more like artistic, emotional side, because I think a lot of filmmakers, especially ones that come from like acting or writing, maybe less from the camera side of things, don't think of aspect ratio as like the super important decision that they have to make. Matt and I work in commercials a lot. I know you do too sometimes, Bobby. And it's something that seems many times like forced upon us. But recently, my last 2 jobs that I've done post on, I've kind of really fought hard for not the aspect ratio that the client wanted. And then the job before that, I lost pretty hard. Like I think that different aspect ratios are good for telling different types of stories. And there is a little bit of like kind of that like masturbatory film student person that just wants everything to be anamorphic and super widescreen and cinematic, because that's what, their favorite movies and it's what Blade Runner is or whatever. Just lately, I've been thinking about aspect ratios a lot more. And I do think that there is like that you're telling a different type of story. And when you're shooting 9:16, vertical video for TikTok or IG stories or whatever, it really forces you to do a different type of storytelling than if you're shooting 16:9 or 2:3:5, like anamorphic, or this new aspect ratio that's getting kind of popular for no reason, but I think just because it's like a nice middle ground, which is like 2:1 aspect ratio, which we'll talk about. So I kind of thought we could start at the widest and go down to the tallest. So we'll start at like 2:4, what we call like the widescreen cinema standard, what a lot of movies are coming out in. And you might hear it referred to as 2:3:9 or 2:3:5. And we'll go all the way down to 9:16, kind of like the TikTok IG story, and talk about what each aspect ratio does to your work from a storytelling point of view. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask both of you, like, in your opinion, who decides what the aspect ratio of a given piece of work is?
Oh, man. You want to go first, Matt? It's funny. I was going to say, when you're riffing on commercials, I find that when I shoot commercials, oftentimes I'm being asked to shoot multiple at the same time. Like you're basically protecting for so many different boxes all at once. And then, not to mention, I was going to say, Matt, remember that job we did where we went even wider than 2:3:5? It was like 16:9 screens run up and to get against each other. It was for an upfront presentation.
Yeah, we shot like 8K and cropped it to be like a specialty. Like it was a custom screen that was wider than any commercial screen out there. Basically, it was like a wrapper. It was for Madison Square Garden. It was like a wraparound, and so we ended up.
So that's 16 times 3. That's 48:9.
Yeah,
that's 48:9.
Yeah. It was fun and also kind of a bummer because how do you compose for that? Like all your instincts.
I wish I was there to see it. I didn't get to see it. Presented in its full glory.
I did, and it was like, so the upfronts, it's like a network will present, all of their stuff to advertisers to try and sell ad space, basically, for their slate of shows. So we were doing it for True TV, which is part of
known
Turner,
for their extreme widescreen.
But so Turner had put together the whole thing, right? So it was CNN, it was Adult Swim, it was all these different brands, and we were relaunching True TV. Like we were the only people who did something custom.
They wanted to make a big splash.
We did, Billy on the Street and in extreme wide. Yeah, it was fun. It's funny you bring up that job, Bobby, and I think it kind of illustrates maybe the broadest thought process for any aspect ratio, because that job, we did have like a Billy on the Street or like a few shows that were just a single person, single subject, and then also a sketch show that had like a cast of like 9.
Yeah.
And so obviously the sketch show where we had the big cast, you could spread them all out and give them different sizes in the frame. Cutting felt a little weird, actually, so we tried to like keep it relatively static, and so we'd have these kind of big tableaus, and that was really easy and fun, and the wider the format, the easier it is to kind of get everyone in a way that's really flattering and interesting and staggered. Whereas a portrait, you were kind of in trouble, basically, because the closer you would get to someone, like the larger in the frame they'd get, no matter what, you couldn't fill the frame, basically, is what I'm getting at. You were just always like, even an extreme close-up, if we'd gotten really like clipping like Billy's chin and his eyebrows, that would still only be a fraction of the frame, like a 16th of the frame, still a sliver, but it would be absurdly close at the same time. So we just kind of did a normal close-up and had like a ton of negative space, if memory serves.
Well, so neither one of you answered my question.
To answer your question,
who
chooses, right?
Oh, who chooses?
Who chooses? I mean, I find if it's a commercial, there's some pretty strong like reasons why the client will have, if it has anything to do with exactly where the ad is supposed to be placed. If it's going to be on TikTok, then they have expectations that it be 9:16 or, for broadcast, and often it's both, and that's why it's both.
That's why, I think you bring up the point though, Bobby, that like it's easy to confuse deliverables, aka like media buy, and aspect ratio are kind of two different things, but like we think of them as locked in as one and the same because of the economies we're trying to achieve of like,
Right.
making one edit and one shot work for multiple different
Right. And we have a
deliverables.
schedule to, you need to shoot a certain amount of stuff. And if you have to shoot like 5 different versions, then it's a pain in the butt. But let's put commercials aside for a second. What about features, TV shows, short films?
It's always been a discussion purely between me and the director, which has been really luxurious, I feel like. The only kind of situation where it felt like the studio had, a pretty strong, compelling reason was, at least with these last 2 Disney movies, is that it's going on a streaming platform. They have expectations, like all their entire library of films are shot a certain way. The audience, they want their audiences to have a full screen experience. If there is a technical reason for it or a studio mandate that it doesn't interfere with like the actual, creative of what we're trying to do, then I don't feel, I think that it's a great format. I don't have like
16 by 9.
a dogmatic, I don't have a dogmatic partiality towards one box proportion over another.
Yeah, I think that there's fun to be had in trying to like say something about what you're making. Like the aspect ratio can be commentary on the product in some way. And I do remember, to answer your question, Oren, if I'm the boss, like if there's not if no one else is paying me and it's like my own thing, whether that's an independent feature or whatever, then sure, I get to pick. And that's a conversation with DP. But I can think of a time where like I was shooting this like this thing for like a military video game, like a Call of Duty type. I can't remember what game it actually was. We shot it all widescreen and then would cut in back and forth in between widescreen and 16 by 9. And I really explained it very thoroughly to everyone. Showed them everything, and then when we got
was there a creative reason where you're like, was like, when we're in like anamorphic or whatever 2.4, we're in our scenes, and then
it's slow, and then
we're going back to real life. We're 16 by 9.
100%. Yeah, it was that was the exact pitch, and the producer was like, "This is for YouTube. People would click away if there's black bars on the screen." I was like, we talked about this in multiple meetings. It really, what it boiled down to is that I don't think that she didn't understand, basically. Furious. I'm still mad about it.
Yeah. I told you about the Rebel Wilson spot I did. We got, we had this amazing DP who shot Thor Dark World, and he got us the exact same camera package from Thor Dark World. Panavision C anamorphic lenses, Alexa 35, beautiful. Panavision version, and everything. And my whole pitch was, we're going to make this behind the scenes video, but shoot it as if it's an epic action film, right? In the way that we've seen like epic action Geico commercials or epic action Kia commercials. This is going to be epic action behind the scenes of a film set commercial. And the day before the shoot, while we're like at the tech scouting and putting everything in place, the agency creatives come over and they're like, hey, the client just wants to make sure this is going to work well in 9:16. Because Rebel Wilson's going to put it on her Instagram stories and on her TikTok. And that's our biggest. I mean, she's got millions and millions of followers, and that's going to be our biggest outlet. More than media, probably. So we just want to make sure it looks good there. and I was like, what? And then the DP comes over to me. He pulls me aside. He's like, hey, Oren, these guys just like pulled me aside and asked me to make sure it looks good in 9:16. I'm like, what should I do? Like, he totally hooked us up with, we didn't really have the budget for that camera package, but he pulled some favors and all that stuff. And I was like, I don't know. Like, let's just tell him it'll look good and then not worry about it. That's actually like one of Yuki's strategies. He's told me, he's like, cause for, years we were stressing out about it. And he's like, I've just realized, like, just let post figure it out. But I went to the creative team and I said, look, from day one, I pitched this as like an anamorphic, like let's shoot anamorphic. literally a week ago. And Kramer, the DP too, said to me, it's like, and they know what anamorphic is. And I was like, yes, they do, but I'm going to bring it up again. We had a pre-pro meeting. I was like, just so you know, anamorphic, it's here. It says, this is why I want to do it. It's going to be like Mission Impossible. It's going to be like Bourne Identity. It's going to be like all these action films we love. Like, yeah, no problem. And then when they brought that up, I went back and I said, hey, we had this whole discussion. Like, will it be viewable in 9:16? Yes, we'll see Rebel Wilson, most of Rebel Wilson in the middle. Will we see the flamethrower she shoots off or like the jetpack? Probably not. Will we see any of this insanely expensive location at Universal Studios? No. Like, why do we go shoot at expensive locations when we don't see them? And I was like, I just think we can do it, but we've all worked really hard to get here and it's really compromising the whole thing. And they're like, okay, we'll just tell the client that we think it's compromising the integrity of the spot. And they did. And the client was like, okay, just do your best to keep it in 9:16. Something this producer, Matt Lancaster, I've talked about him before on the podcast, told me that's been like one of the most eye-opening things, believe it or not, in the past few years for my career is he told me that I'm not selfish enough as a director. And he's like, I work with these directors. They'll do a shot the client doesn't want, the agency doesn't want, producers don't want, but they're like, this is the thumbnail for my fucking commercial. So I'm doing this shot. And I've learned just from that at the end of the day, like the people, like the work we want to do, we all want to do cinematic work. We all want to do epic things. None of us want to be making TikTok videos for a living because frankly, other people are way better at it than us. Right. And if we want to get people to hire us to make the stuff we want to make, then we need to show them that epic stuff, that widescreen anamorphic, at least 16:9 things. We go to websites. Right. I noticed you have under commercials, Hillary Duff, Bring It to the Bin, produced by Art Class, which I don't know if you know, but I signed with them recently. But your thumbnail is widescreen because that's kind of the stuff that we, I think, respond to. And so even if the client's like, hey, this is going to air 9:16, I think client agency people, please don't listen to this next part. But I think you should just make whatever you think is closest to the stuff that you want to make. And then ultimately people will start hiring you to make stuff that looks like that, whether it works well for Google Analytics or sells drive time or whatever, like we shouldn't be anal about it. And shouldn't, like, if we're having someone talking at a desk in an office, it doesn't need to be anamorphic, but if we're shooting like epic things, let's give them like an epic aspect ratio. So to me, that's when you go 2:4, 2:3:5. And I for the record, I do mostly comedy. I very, very rarely shoot anamorphic. I've learned that for certain things like car commercials, like feature films, like super cinematic things, places where you want to show off the location, that's helpful. And also, some of our past guests, the Riverside Entertainment guys, told us whenever they get a car commercial, it doesn't matter the budget. They say we got to shoot this anamorphic because it makes it look high end. It makes it look sophisticated. Mercedes commercial is not going to be one by one.
Well, so let's get into the specifics a little bit more of 2:3:5 or just anamorphic, aspect ratio and generally speaking, right? The reason that it looks good and a car commercial looks good is there's two reasons. One, a car is long and short, right? So like you can show it off in that aspect ratio perfectly. Like if you were trying to shoot a 9:16 car commercial, your car's just going to be teeny in the frame if you see, nose to end on it, right? Car commercials tend to be in great locations, right? You don't see a car like you're not advertising the new Mercedes when it's like, oh yeah, it's kind of like stuck in traffic on its way down Laurel Canyon in North Hollywood. It's big, it's Malibu, it's the Grand Canyon, it's you're off-roading in the redwoods. It's like there's only so many things that you can say about a product when it's a car, right? And part of the way that you can indicate a lifestyle or an ethos or a point of view is where people drive those cars. So background is super important. And again, you miss out on it otherwise. The other thing, you mentioned, Oren, all of these like high-end TV programs, car commercials, super
Mandalorian
cinematic.
is 2:3:5 anamorphic.
Yeah. And I think that's what you think of when people think of, anamorphic aspect ratios. They think of that. But Bobby and I shot a short together called A Gray One a good number of years ago now. That was 235. And for those of you who haven't seen it, is a 2-character piece about a person who finds a gray pubic hair, and then they have a long conversation about mortality as a result of that. So a really talky, jokey, broad comedy. We shot 235 as a commentary on the subject matter. How do you say, like, we're going to take this pube joke and make it super serious?
So that was the
it's a nice juxtaposition.
The inspiration to shoot it in that aspect ratio.
Yeah, 100%.
I think it is a huge factor. Yeah, for sure.
And I'm looking on your website, Matt, your awkward at parties horror movie parody. I guess 235 is when we want things to feel cinematic. Now, my question about this aspect ratio, because I think a lot of people do this and I've been guilty of doing it too, is sometimes the decision to just put the 235 mat on is made in post. What do you think? Bobby's cringing.
I have thoughts about that. Oh yeah. I mean, there's just a missed opportunity because it's not that. I think doing that, you're not considering how you could have made it better on the day. Like the proportions, the actual proportions of the frame, like, can affect how you frame something. So if you're just framing something for 16:9 and then you chop off the top and bottom, you're going to end up with something that it just feels. It's kind of like how in VHS days you would have like a 2-3-5 movie, like something by James Cameron, and then you'd have or you'd have like The Abyss, but it was like cropped and pan and scan. And so you're basically doing pan and scan, except the opposite direction.
You're pan and scanning up and down.
Not to say that 4:3 isn't a invalid aspect ratio. It's just that
you just need
you would
ideal
shoot
to know
for
it.
Yeah,
exactly.
Because you would be placing things in the frame. I don't know. I think there's so much consideration being put in what is where.
Yeah. Well, and I think to your point, Oren, it's like hard nowadays. We'll often shoot with 15% edges so that you can add things back in if you need to. If you realize, I do want this to be a little bit wider or something, you have
and
that.
I want to qualify, I think, more than any other DP. I'm actually pretty I'm pretty encouraging of people to reframe after the fact, so long as it respects
the intentions.
My connection just said it. Yeah, the intentions. My connection just said like it cut out or something.
Oh no, I think you're good. Yeah, you're good.
But yeah, like I don't have a problem with that. Yeah, exactly. As long as it respects the intentions. But like if you're doing a blanket, like just I'm going to cut everything off because now suddenly I feel like it looks quote cooler. I don't know.
Yeah, like for as a practical example, if you were shooting a wide shot where you wanted a character head to toe, and you compose that for 16:9, and then you decided after the fact to make it 9:16, if you shrink the frame down so that the character you can still see their toes and the top of their head, you're probably
cut off them. You're cutting them off at the shins. Or
you would cut them off at the shins otherwise, or if you scaled it down, you don't have enough pixels on the sides in order to fill it in. Now, look, someday that might be a very easy VFX fix, and I think we probably all have been party to scenarios where you reframe and you do just fill in pixels.
I had to implement that for Charles and Ben. We did a series where we were just like too close on a close up, and so it was a 2:40 series, and we actually pulled out and just like cloned. I'm sure, again, when generative AI gets advanced enough, you'll just be able to just generate whatever you
honestly
have.
In those circumstances. I think you can literally right now. Like I think it's
probably.
It'd be nice if it were built
into
DaVinci.
Yeah, it just kind of depends how much the camera's moving and stuff. But yeah, I just did this campaign a few weeks ago, and just in the edit, I was literally just kind of playing with the footage. We had the editor was working. And I was like, I like to do like a little rough cut myself to send to the editor, just some ideas. And I just like threw on a 2.3. We shot 16:9. I threw on a 2.35 met just for fun. And I was like, this looks kind of cool. And I sent it to the editor. I'm like, there's no way a client is going to go for this. It's like mainly for social. And the editor's like, this is kind of cool. Maybe you want me to just go with it? I was like, sure. Let's see what happens. Anyway, now we're finishing in 2.35 and I'm like begging the post producer to go to 2, back to 2, to 2:1, which is the next ratio I wanted to talk about because now because I feel like now we've cut off like Matt saying like there's a shot of a guy and his dog and like we can either see the dog's entire body or the guy's head, but we can't see both. Yeah, so I do think there is like this would be like becoming my favorite aspect ratio, 2:1, because it's very cinematic. Nice. Like you can put someone clearly on the left, someone clearly on the right. You can center someone, and I actually love making my pitch decks like treatments and stuff in 2:1 because it's just that you have 2 squares, right? So you can put a square image on the right or 2 rectangular images, 2:1 images on the right. And then
that's
a
nice.
square of text on the left or text on the top left. It's very easy to break it into quadrants.
Really clean.
Yeah. It's a great aspect ratio. And fun fact, Game of Thrones was shot and presented in 16:9, but House of the Dragon, the new season of Game of Thrones, is 2:1. And it's a totally made up like kind of aspect ratio.
So here's what I like about 2:1, actually. It feels like it's the compromise between creatives and executives because to your point, Bobby, like plenty of places I'm sure are like, no, use all of the screen. Everyone's TVs are shaped 16:9. Use the whole friggin' thing. And people who are like, it's art, like you can compose better when it's wider, right? 2:1 is such that it almost feels like the letterboxing is just the bevel of a TV. Like you don't really, I think most people don't notice when that the image is letterboxed at all when it's a 2:1 ratio. It just it's so inconsequential, but from an artistic perspective, from a compositional perspective, it just makes things a little bit easier. I think it's pretty nice.
Some other shows that shoot 2:1, which I didn't realize until I was kind of prepping for this episode, are House of Cards, which
I was going to say, I thought House of Cards was like one of the first.
Oh.
No. One of the first
probably.
to do 2:1. And like they kind of.
Yeah. And when you're David Fincher, you probably get to call the aspect ratio. And of course, now if you've created Game of Thrones, one of the biggest streaming hits of all time, you get to say like, hey, we want to change the aspect ratio. And HBO is like, okay. But also Ozark, Stranger Things, and not even like only like kind of big sci-fi genre things, but like Transparent 2:1, Fargo 2:1. So it's such, to me, it's like a great place. And I'm sure there's some AI haters out there, but it's also my favorite Mid-Journey aspect ratio. Like my default is always 2:1 because I know that I can take that and stick it in a 16:9 pretty easily. And I can also stretch it out to make it wider, like fill out my whole treatment page, or take up 1/4. Yeah. So, and I mainly use Mid-Journey for treatments and stuff. So before we leave the 2s though, I wanted to ask Bobby real quick, to get these widescreen aspect ratios, there's 2 popular ways to do it, right? So you can either shoot with regular lenses, right? Like everyone shoots, and then you put the black bars in post, and hopefully on set you have some guides or you're framing for this widescreen. Or you can get these special lenses, right? The anamorphic lenses that literally squeeze your image horizontally by 50% or 2 times.
There's actually multiple squeeze factors as well. Yeah, it's become crazy because I mean the original 240 anamorphic format was born out of the fact that the lens squeezed the image horizontally. You're basically, anamorphic means, the word is that you're taking an image that's normally very rectangular and squeezing it vertically into I'm trying to like describe this for audio only,
Right,
like
so
squeezing
35
it
millimeter
into
film.
something that's more like a square. Yeah, for a 35 millimeter film. So that's where it was born out of. But nowadays you can do almost so many different combinations digitally because.
And correct me if I'm wrong. That's why, like in old classic anamorphic movies, the bokeh is all
or the lens flares,
oblong
right?
rather than
It's
exactly
all the lens flares. That's part of the draw for the creative choice of doing it. Most of the time, is that the lenses that you usually are opting into have just funny characteristics. They have really interesting things to look at, and
but like you, when I shot, the first time I shot anamorphic with Yuki, he would be like, you have to think of it, because I'd say like, what lens is that? And he'd be like, well, you have to think of it. It's like a 40 vertically, and it's like a 20 horizontally.
The magnification is different, right? Exactly. Yeah. It's different.
Interesting.
In both directions,
2 to 1
and that's
ratio.
why that 40 millimeter lens is very popular in anamorphic, because the 40 is like a great medium shot and 20 is a great wide shot. And you can kind of get both in anamorphic when you're doing a portrait of someone, one person or two people talking. Right. It's like you see them at a 20 wide, but like kind of the same resolution and feeling of a 40 vertically. It's a weird way to think about it. And post is actually like a total pain in the butt, because your pixels are no longer square. They have to be the width.
There's special handling that has to be taken into account.
You get really weird resolutions.
I've helped a few people with that. Yeah, weird resolutions.
Way more pixels.
And you just have to way more pixels. Yeah. So it's massively simplified for sure when you're shooting spherical lenses. There's a lot of reasons. In fact, like most of the stuff that I've shot in 240, I've actually shot cropped for spherical, and it usually has to do with the availability of certain lenses. Anamorphic lenses are generally more expensive to procure, but money isn't everything. It's actually the technical, like there's a lot of technical reasons why there's actually advantages to shooting spherical and then just cropping. You still get the benefits and the creative
compositional
implications, compositional.
Is there any drawback to it? I know like the Farewell was shot spherical but cropped to 2.4. Like there's been like studio films and stuff that do that.
I think the characteristics that Bobby was talking about.
Yeah,
like
you're losing out
is like
on,
much
right. You're gaining some flexibility in terms of, there's just a wider range of lenses, although that's changing right now. I think manufacturers are really just gearing up to make so many different kinds of lenses, but at least at a certain point there was lots of creative advantages in being able to have like a much bigger lens set. I think with certain anamorphic sets, you only have like 3 or 4 different choices, especially if you're on a lower budget feel. Whereas with the same amount of money, you get like a 6 or 8 lens set, a little bit more flexibility.
Yeah, I do love the when you have 3 lenses on set, though.
It is great.
Just for people who maybe haven't ever shot anamorphic, the focus behaves differently than a spherical experience. So if you're everyone's shot with like basically anytime you've shot anything, it's been with a spherical lens, unless you're going out of your way to shoot anamorphic. And so we've internalized a lot of just the ways that the spherical lens focuses on things, and correct me if I'm, Bobby, you can explain it better than I can, but like especially when you're squeezing anamorphic, the focal range is in a bit of like an arc almost, basically.
There's a sweet spot, and different lenses will have different ranges of flexibility, but in general, the moment you opt into anamorphic, you're basically, there's usually murmurs of like, okay, like you better get a really great AC, better get a great focus puller, because it's a little bit more touchy in terms of when the lens is actually sharp, and the outsides, the edges of the frame can sometimes always be blurry depending on the characteristics of that specific lens and how old it is.
Right. So
And
something
you're just focusing for the middle part.
Yeah, you're focusing for the middle and knowing that like something that's on the same plane but just further from the center of your composition is going to be blurrier as a result.
Right. And so you just have to take into account, as with anything in photography, like all of these different variables and know that, because now there's so much mixing and matching. I mean, people are using anamorphic lenses for 1.8.5 presentations. They're cropping the left and right of a lens just because they want those characteristics that we're talking about, and vice versa. You know, you're using spherical for widescreen. It's just like Wild West. You can do whatever you want.
Okay, hey, we just switched to Bobby's different microphone because his original microphone was a little staticky.
Whoops.
So we're all good.
I don't have all the fancy microphones you guys have.
Yeah.
Hey, well, anyhow, let's continue. So 2-to-1, highly recommended ratio. It's my new fave, and I'm going to try to use it more and kind of recommend it more. I'm pitching on a shoot right now that's supposed to be cinematic, and I'm really going to push 2-to-1 as an aspect ratio, and we'll see what they say. 1.8.5 I listed just because it's like the original, widescreen standard, but I don't think anyone like cares about it anymore.
Honestly, I didn't even recognize it. I was like, I don't know what that is.
It's like the Academy standard, right, Bobby?
I think 1.8.5, I think something happens because TVs still have like a safe zone, like an action safe zone. And I think that there's something where if something is 1.8.5, you can just barely see that there's a black bar on some televisions. So even if they were respecting it, you wouldn't notice it because it's just that little bit of a difference.
And 1.8.5 is probably like Kramer versus Kramer, Godfather. Probably all those movies are in 1.8.5, like the old classics.
Yeah.
But nowadays, we don't care about old classics.
That's not the Academy ratio, though. The Academy ratio is 4:3.
But you know that like widescreen was developed as a competition for TV, right? It was like all kind of 4:3. And then people were like, wait, people can watch 4:3 at home. What can we offer them in the cinemas?
We'll make the screens wider. Yeah.
Right.
Like it feels like this ancient thing, but it's actually...
I mean, we're leaving out my favorite aspect ratios, 70 millimeter ultra wide, circle vision,
IMAX,
IMAX. There's all sorts of good aspect ratios that aren't on this list. But I do love a gimmicky, like a circle vision, which is, of course, the technology pioneered at Disney for Disney World.
360 degrees.
360. Yeah. But also Cinerama, which is ultra wide as well, wider than 1.8.5. The reason I bring them up is because they were all gimmicks they were like
woo people into the theaters.
And not necessarily specifically storytelling, but more just like spectacle of it all. Like the early, like This Is Cinerama, which was the original film that played in Cinerama domes, is a travelogue. It's like people skiing in the Alps and things like the idea of
immersive sound and stuff.
Yeah, traveling the world when you couldn't otherwise.
Well, so I think then we go to 1.7.8, 16:9, and I have very little knowledge of what goes on with film students nowadays. I do think that even though we're talking about how cool 2.3.5 is, and I'm saying 2-to-1 is like becoming one of my favorite aspect ratios, I do think that there's a certain type of film that if you shot in 2.3.5 and like anamorphic, it would be kind of silly and unnecessary. A kind of contained TV comedy or something, like Modern Family.
When you say silly, you mean pretentious.
Yeah, you're saying it would be silly to do.
It would make it seem almost more amateurish, that the filmmaker is using this epic aspect. I think those aspect ratios are good for epic stories. They make things feel larger than life. And they're not like, I wouldn't shoot like a mumblecore, relatable, like handheld. We're all in this, this is like just like us type of story in, anamorphic.
Right. You're saying in your imagination of what's happening in film schools right now, someone's watching a short film where it starts on an alarm clock and there's a shot from inside the fridge. And then it's like, you're probably wondering how I got here. Rewind.
Well, even like two people in an apartment talking cropped at 235. You know,
everyone is 22. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get, and you're saying it's pretentious, basically.
But not pretend. I think of pretentious as like high art or something. Mm-hmm. But I think this is more like I'm trying to make a Michael Bay movie on no budget, so I'm framing it 235. But like, you don't have the things to fill the frame horizontally with, like a white wall in 235 is no different than a white wall in 16:9. And in 16:9, you actually want to make it more about the person. It's like the advantage to me, like as you go narrower on the aspect ratio, it's more about the people, right? That's why we end up like at TikTok and Instagram stories that are really about the people and not at all about the location.
Let's talk about 4:3.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I don't care for it. I worked on a movie, Come On, Mike Mills film that was in 4:3, black and white. There is something that harkens to a different era of cinema when you're shooting like 4:3 black and white.
Yeah, 4:3 basically is like the like we said before, the Academy ratio. It's what TVs used to be shaped like. I will say this: I remember on Key and Peele, they did a sketch where Keegan is in head to toe denim, kind of like a Steven Seagal type, and he's got a mullet. He's breaking into a drug cartel mansion, right? Like there's like bikini girls and guys with Uzis on guard, and all he does is snap their necks. He like sneaks up behind people and snaps their necks, like that's all he does. Like that's the whole thing. It's like there's no karate chops, there's no high kicks. It's just neck snapping, and it was so fun. But was meant to. They shot it 4:3, and I remember saying to the director, like, and watching them frame it up, it felt like home movies in the best way. Like there is, if you grew up shooting 4:3 because that's what
like
your VHS,
right? If it's like a 90s style, throwback.
There is something really fun about it, and I think to your point, Oren, as we're getting narrower, 4:3 does. You can shoot a really cool like portrait or two shot in 4:3.
Absolutely. One of the last like little comedy spec commercials I just did, we opted for 4:3 actually, just for fun.
Just for fun.
And you're still shooting 16:9, but you're cropping to 4:3.
Exactly. Yeah. And you're putting guides in so that you know what the frame lines are. But
yeah. Well, speaking of guides, like what about 1:1? To me, this is a format that.
There you go.
That is, I just shot it this last week. We shot 16:9, but 1:1 safe. And it was a pain in the butt. Like we shot a football party, right? And we had like 7 extras, just people, having some people over watching a football game. Mm-hmm. And we were shooting some inserts of the TV. It was for a TV company. And you have to have your TV in the 1:1, Mm-hmm. So it's funny when you're framing a TV to be on TV, but now you have to frame it extra small because you want to fit it on the 1:1. It's like feels almost unnatural.
Well, so as we return to the idea of shooting for multiple formats at once, I think the move then is like you actually shoot it even wider, knowing that you'll crop it for both the 1:1 or the 16:9.
Yeah, we're just like dressing the TV console in a certain way that we're not dressing to, like we're trying to have the 1:1 feel all the things we're dressing in. And so there's just this instinct to push things into the middle. And so I had this get together where everyone's watching the football game. We have 7 extras. And if you have 7 extras, do you try to get all 7 of them into the 1:1?
No, I think you
you have 5 in this 1:1 and like 1 on each end or something.
And 1 on each end.
There'd have to be layers. There'd have to be layers.
Yeah.
The blocking and the staging of it.
It's like shoulders and backs and stuff, which also, Oren, you're so big on scope. I think an easy mistake when you're blocking extras is to get all of them clean inside the frame. And I think it's always better for them to waste half of or a third of or even the majority of an extra, because that then implies that there's even more space.
Yeah.
off to the sides, or more people off to the sides.
100%. And that's always my philosophy, is like, how can we imply that there's more things happening off frame, that we're just pointed our camera somewhere randomly and this is where we landed. Now, I'm glad you brought that up, because in the 16:9, if you want to get them to be like not fully in frame, now they're really far away from the other 5 extras that are in the 1:1. You know, there's this unnatural gap. And also, like, the client comes and they say, hey, 1:1 is the hero format. Like, we want the 1:1 to look the best. I don't know. I really hate it. Not as much as I hate the 9:16 and the 16:9 at the same time. So when we get to vertical 9:16, like kind of the traditional TikTok aspect ratio, is there anything you think that aspect ratio is good for?
Yeah, 100%. Portraits.
What else? Dancing.
Yeah.
Like a single person dancing is like pretty good.
It's good for having a bunch of interface stuff on the bottom of the frame with comments popping up and like the title on top. And then you really have to have this tiny area in the middle.
Yeah. But even when we're not talking about TikTok, I think I genuinely, I've rounded the corner on, there are certain things that a 9:16 aspect ratio is great at, and embracing those. It's hard to do dialogue unless it's shot reverse shot. The 2-shot is the thing that suffers the most, and it's the thing that I maybe like shooting the best.
Why do I go to TikTok right now and I see someone interviewing people on the street and it looks fine to me? Like, that's what I don't get, is why I can't shoot 9:16. I try to storyboard it and it just looks so narrow and stuffed. But I look on TikTok and it just looks like so natural, you know?
Part of it is also like, we're shooting on lens packages that are designed for wider presentations, where proportionally it's longer than it is tall. Whereas a phone camera, like, you basically have to commit to shooting on extremely wide angle lenses,
right,
the whole time. And that is what a phone is. They're just super wide angle.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you just see these like wide.
Wide.
It's, I guess, from pretty far away.
Telephoto stuff far away. I was going to say the other thing, that the reason you're like, this looks so good on TikTok, why do I like it okay, is because the people who are...
Right, because this stuff looks good on TikTok. When one person is talking to camera, walking around.
Just talking.
Yeah, that's fine. But even when you're like I'm thinking of Podcast Outside, or like, you know, there's all like panel sort of shows. The thing that people will do is just not care about image resolution. So they'll shoot a wide, and then they're willing to do a pan and scan, whip back and forth between the person interviewing and back and forth. And like, there are all sorts of rules that we have internalized that don't count, that don't matter, basically, to a TikTok audience. Like, you know, you think about like how many green screen videos go mega viral. It'll be a person on green screen talking over phone interfaces or like an article or whatever. And it seems insane that image quality is acceptable, because like their ears getting clipped off, they're floating, like you can see the edge where they've been. Like, the green screen is truly terrible, like worse than what we would have done at 15 with our, you know, first computer. And millions of people are watching it and don't have a problem with it. And it's just like the language of TikTok is different than what our filmmaking brains have come to expect.
Look at this awesome TikTok video. It's these 5, what I must assume are sorority girls.
How do you both think about graphics and negative spacing when you're talking about all of these different aspect ratios?
Yeah, I try not to think about it. I did have a shoot last week. This other new thing that's been cropping up like over the last 2 years is that social videos need to work without sound. And so they'll either, if there's dialogue, there's captions, or a lot of times they're like real stylized captions, right? The text is not just like in a black box on the bottom. It's like all over the place. And yeah, this last job I had, we actually had a VFX/graphics supervisor on set, and he was super helpful at saying like, hey,
that's the ideal
You
situation.
have a lot of dialogue in this shot. just know we're going to have to put that on screen, and you don't have a lot of space for us to do it.
Yeah.
How cool to just know that your work that you're spending so much time on is going to be viewed while someone's taking a dump.
Dude, I would love for that. That's when I'm at my most focused. Well, final fun fact, Spielberg shot Jurassic Park in 1:8:5 because he wanted to show the dinosaurs how tall they are.
That's right.
My last question for you guys. So we've talked about all these aspect ratios from 2:4 to 9:16. As filmmakers, we want to, we want all our work hopefully to lead to new work, better work, more exciting work. How do you display these like various aspect ratios on your website?
I don't even know the answer.
Well, it's funny. The design that I kind of embraced for my website, even though I've shot different aspect ratios for the kind of tiles that are represented there, I opted to present the thumbnails all in 240. And when you click the piece of work, then it like adapts the viewer space to the aspect ratio that it ultimately will be. So it's slightly dynamic, actually. But as far as the thumbnails are concerned, they are all 240, just so that they can stack them all kind of in a way. So I'm already breaking my own rules. Like I'm already modifying my own. I guess I'm having to take creative license on creative license.
If you go to my website, directedbyoren.com, I have, it's kind of designed that some videos go across multiple columns and other ones are kind of spread out in the columns. And I put it in such a way where kind of my anamorphic videos go across 2 columns. Then I can just embed the like 2:4 video that I put on Vimeo onto my website.
Right.
In that aspect ratio.
I'm glad for Vimeo having the native option.
Yeah. In Vimeo, you can do any resolution. However, if
I think you can do that on YouTube now as well.
Really?
Oh, cool.
I think so.
Good.
Yeah.
But if I was going to send a sample of my work, like, hey, here's 3 commercials you should see, or 2, a trailer or whatever, I would probably try to send them 16:9 letterbox. So I have on Vimeo both versions of everything. Even for my 9:16 stuff, I have it in 9:16 and also 9:16 embedded in a 16:9, because if someone wants to show like, hey, here's 3 clips from Bobby, here's 3 clips from Matt, it's annoying when they're not the same aspect ratio.
That's interesting.
I don't know. I think going back to the very beginning of our conversation, I think people just know that different things are in different shapes now.
Yeah. But if you like think of a wire drive link that you're sending someone to pitch, Matt, like, and you have 3 thumbnails and like 2 of them are wide and the third one is like real tall.
Yeah, sure. This is a conversation of all sorts of shapes.
Mainly rectangles.
Yeah.
With one square in the middle.
Well, if you the 70 millimeter, it's kind of like the wings out, almost like the bat signal. If
you're like one of those people that buys a curved TV.
Yeah.
What is wrong with you?
I just have an Oculus. Anyway, Bobby, do you have a few more minutes to hang out and endorse with us?
Yeah, I have a couple loaded.
Unpaid endorsements.
All right, so my unpaid endorsement is the new film, You Hurt My Feelings. Do you guys know this movie?
Yeah, I want to see that.
Yeah, just a little. Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and we know the DP.
Yeah, so the DP Jeff Waldron. It's a Nicole Holofcener movie who did Walking and Talking and Enough Said. I truly love this filmmaker's work. But so You Hurt My Feelings. Do you guys know the premise?
Yeah, is it about a writer that overhears her husband saying that he doesn't think she's a very good writer?
That's exactly right. They're a happy couple. They've been married for years. She's kind of struggling with her new book. Julia Louis-Dreyfus is like going to sneak up on her husband. She sees him out and about and overhears him saying that he just isn't into the book. So it's very like upper crust white people problems for sure. They're like he's a therapist. They're all rich.
Noah Baumbach type of
yeah. Like
subject matter.
100%. Which is my shit. I loved it so much. All the performances are great. It's funnier than I think some of her other work is like it's or rather I should say it's jokier, but without losing any of the humanity or introspection. And, to be honest, man, it's so nice that these movies are getting made. There's not that many of them being made anymore. It used to be like, oh, this is the indie version of, a studio comedy that we would get 5 or 6 of every year in that mid-range. And that's kind of moved to the way of Netflix and maybe is getting squeezed out. Who knows what's going to happen? But I saw it in theaters.
Oh, you did?
Nice.
Who was watching your child?
My sister-in-law did us a solid. We went to the Alamo Draft House and saw it in a movie theater. And I'll tell you what.
I love that.
Not only was it great, but also for all of the reasons that we love going to movie theaters, laughing with other people, not looking at your phone, it made it a special, fun experience. So I guess I'm endorsing movie theaters in addition. Bobby, what you got?
I got 2. You guys use Shot Deck?
Yep.
Sure, yeah.
I figured you guys had endorsed it before, but specifically why I'm bringing it for this is I actually happen to use it just to because they have the aspect ratio filter. You guys want to fancy a guess at which one between 185 and 239? Which one? It shows you the number of images they have in the database of which ones are 185 and which ones are 239. Guess which one is the top?
I guess I'm going to go with 185 just because it seems like the less obvious one, and also the classic movies are like
239, right?
239 has 184,000 images, and 185 has 125,000. So actually, 239 is in the lead. My only other endorsement, I'll make this quick, is because that was my original thought was Steve Yedlin's website. It's a DP that I really respect.
Right, he was like the first guy that did an entire documentary about why resolution doesn't matter.
Resolution doesn't matter. What format? You can shoot on any camera and basically you have to treat the camera as a box. So if you go to his website, there's a display prep video that you can just download, and it literally has him doing a voiceover explaining his process, and I think his logic is just totally sound. And it was his big inspiration for my work on Who Are You People, actually.
It looks like he's got nerdy film tech stuff hashtag on Twitter.
Yes, that's the hashtag. It's a great hashtag.
Okay, I got a couple things. You ready?
Hit us.
Okay, first of all, do you know about the Venice Rialto? Do you know what that is, Bobby?
I love the Rialto. We used it on Under Wraps too.
Do you know what it is, Matt?
No, it sounds like a race car or a beverage.
Oh, you'll love it. Matt would love this kind of stuff.
It is. So I'd shot on the Venice before. Sony Venice, very popular camera. There's a new one, Sony Venice 2. One thing I did notice about it when I shot with it is we had a handheld setup, and it was very heavy. I tried to pick it up a little bit, and our operator had the easy rig and all those things. I just shot with it again last week. The DP owned it, and he said, "Oh yeah, I have this thing called the Rialto." And I was like, "What is that?" It's like, "Oh, you don't know the Rialto? It's amazing. It's like a component you connect to your camera that holds the lens and the sensor. You don't need then it connects with the cable to the camera.
I have seen these.
A tiny box. It's like the size. It's smaller than like a Blackmagic pocket camera. It's just this tiny box with a PL mount. You
it's
put the
just
lens
the
on it.
Sensor and a lens, basically.
Yeah,
and a big cable that connects it back to the.
Yeah, and you have to put
body.
the follow focus on it if you're using follow focus. But my dream, I always get these amazing shots with my iPhone, and then I'm like, there's no way to do this with like a nice camera because I'm just like running around handholding.
Oh, now you can.
My
now
iPhone.
You can.
But yeah, this you can literally. We're doing handheld.
You're still cabled to the brick, though.
Yeah, but you can get like a 20-foot cable, and you can have someone wrangle
long
it
cable, or you can wear it as a backpack. I've seen backpack rigs.
Yeah, but you're literally just
makes
holding
it more.
Yeah. It's like you're holding an iPhone size thing, a little bit bigger with like a prime PL mount lens. It's crazy, and you can stick it
too.
Like we used it to, you want to put the camera in the corner of a room. Yep. And Venice is this giant camera that's like a foot long. You just put the Rialto. It's literally just sticking the lens. It's like a GoPro. You can stick it in a car. And he was telling me about it when we were talking about. He was talking about Top Gun Maverick, that they just have a bunch of Rialtos.
Oh, interesting.
They put all these cameras in the cockpit of an airplane. Yep. You can't fit these giant
You can't fit it. Yeah.
Yeah. So really cool tool. Venice Rialto. used it before. I had a couple other things I'll just say real quick. It's a real random one, but do you know who Karen Gillan is?
Love Karen Gillan.
She plays Nebula in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies.
Just Doctor Who as well. She was in Doctor Who.
Doctor Who?
Exactly.
And she has a YouTube channel, 100,000 subscribers. Good, but like for, in a major movies, it's not like overly known. And she posted a video 11 days ago called A Week in the Life of Playing Nebula in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And
cool.
It's like exactly what any TikTok or YouTube or whatever would post about a day in their life. And it's like, it just makes her seem like just such a normal person that goes through 5 hours of makeup to become Nebula. And she walks around and James Gunn is there and he's like, what are you doing? She's like, I'm doing a day in the life. And he's like, oh, cool. Are you ready? We're going to shoot over here. We're doing this scene. Like, so you get to see him talk to her just as an actor. He's a director. And then she goes to promote
she did that.
Some movie that she's in, some other movie. And they're at a photo shoot and she goes to like a fitting and she's just in the elevator and she's at home and she's like super down to earth and real. And like, she just seems very like normal, but she's working on these like billions of dollars worth of movies in a way that I haven't really seen other actors do before. Karen Gillan, her last name, Gillan. I know her mostly as Nebula, but yeah, I guess she's also Doctor Who. The last thing, sometimes I don't know what's wrong with me, but I get emotional about the weirdest things nowadays. And I just saw this article in the New York Times about 36 hours in Los Angeles, it's called. And it's like, if you have 36 hours in Los Angeles, what you should do. Mm-hmm. And it's just an itinerary. Friday, start on the west side. Go to this In-N-Out. Go to this, rent a bike from this place.
Whoa.
Go to Will Rogers State Beach. Go to Abbott, skip Abbott Kinney to go to this Tortoise General Store or whatever. Like, and it's just, if you live in LA or if you're visiting LA, which I'm assuming most people that listen to this podcast fit into one of those categories at some point in their life. It just made me like, people are hating on LA a lot right now. And, for somewhat justified reasons, it's very expensive to live here. And, some of the neighborhoods are a little rough. It just made me really proud of LA. And I like was reading it and I was like, wow, I want to live in this city. And then I'm like, I do live in the city. So 36 hours in Los Angeles. It's a New York Times article, not an LA Times article. And it has a lot of cool places that I haven't heard of. Well, cool. Bobby, thanks so much for coming on. I know we've known you for a long time and are excited to have you on. And if you have any opinions on aspect ratios yourself, like how you pick them, if you think they're not nearly as important as dedicating an entire episode, any aspect
of these ratios.
Yeah. Please let us know. We're justshootitpod@gmail.com. You can find us across all social media. Just Shoot It Pod. I am on Instagram @OKaplan.
I'm at Mr. Matt Enlow. Bobby, where can people find you if they want to learn?
At Bobby DP on either Twitter or Instagram, and BobbyLam.com.
Yeah, BobbyLam.com is kind of like, if you wanted to reach out to Bobby, hire him for something, ask him about something.
Yeah. Do you have an agent? You prefer people contact you directly?
I'm self-represented.
Oh, nice. Go check out his stuff. He has a lot of really cool things. And I heard you're very inexpensive. I'm just kidding, but cool.
Well, this episode was edited by Noah Bayshore. Thanks, Noah. And producer Tyler Small. And you're listening to music provided by the Free Music Archive and the artist Jazar. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.